All right, guys, welcome to the Hushlife Podcast. Hey, before we get started, make sure you join our VIP text message group. If you have not already, you want to jump on. We've got giveaways that we do periodically throughout the year, and you will automatically be entered to win. This coming week, March 16th through the 19th, we're going to be giving away 3 pairs of the brand new First Light Foundry Pant Series. The winner will be able to select the choice of pant. We'll probably talk a little bit about that later today. All you have to do is text one word, Hush Foundry, Foundry. So Hush Foundry to the number 29071. We will announce a winner on or before the 21st of March. So make sure you join the text message group and good luck. Now let's get into the podcast. Did I nail it?
Nice.
That's pretty good, dude.
Old Ford likes to say, if you don't get it on the first take, you're never going to get it at all. So,
ladies and gentlemen, people listening everywhere, we're joined today by our good friend and partner, business partner, Kevin Harlander. He is Kev, what is your official role with First Light exactly? Define what that is that you do. That's
a great question. The title is Director of Community. So I run all of our influencers, all of our pro team, guide and outfitter programs, brand partnerships and relationships, kind of just the outbound communications a lot of times between First Light and our partners. So great gig, best job in the world, and get to work with guys like you. So it's pretty good week so far.
Why don't you give us a little background about like where you grew up, where you came from?
Yeah, you bet. It's kind of a longer story, but I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, and then kind of grew up hunting and fishing with my folks and my family, mostly hunting whitetail deer and upland game and waterfowl. Really got into goose hunting and duck hunting, as I got into high school, because it's so accessible to what we were trying to accomplish. You could drive 30 minutes and be in some pretty good field goose hunting situations. So really got to cut my teeth started on goose calling and field hunting there, and then ended up going to school in Iowa for college. Played baseball at a small liberal arts school in northeastern Iowa, and really learned more about whitetail deer hunting there and helped manage some ground and kind of got my feet wet with regard to wildlife management. And then during college, I moved out west. My mom's sister lives in a little place called Wallowa County in Eastern Oregon. So I moved there when I was like 18, 19 and started fighting wildland fire. Did that for a bunch of years. And that's really how I kind of came to Western hunting, right? I was around all these guys that basically worked from May to the end of September, and then they basically hunted the rest of the year. So I got a great introduction from some really awesome people over there, and that led to a short career in elk guiding in the West, and then got hooked up with First Light about 2 or so years ago to come in, and I was running marketing and sales for a small brewery over there and elk guiding in the falls, and then kind of transitioned into the outdoor industry full time. And is that my phone? Sorry, can you hear that? Okay. Yeah, so then just got hooked up with First Light, about 2 years ago, and been working on the marketing team ever since. And we've done a lot of crazy things in the last 2 years. It's been sort of a couple years of change, and then keeping our foundation strong. We've got a lot of emphasis. A lot of what I do is with our Western team, right, and making sure that folks know from guys like Hush and Born and Raised and across the gamut, Meat Eater, what's happening at First Light. So that's kind of my role, and that's how I got there.
Were you a Vikings fan by any chance, Kev?
Yeah, I grew up in the Randy Moss, Dante Culpepper days. That was good times. It's like being a Twins fan too, man. It's just hard. It was just we always lost. That was the worst part.
I see
because of the front office, I think.
Casey Butler, I know where you're headed.
Because of the front office. That's why you guys always lost back then.
Yeah.
Brian used to intern for him.
Oh, really? That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, well, I worked for the old Vikings in the 2001 season, which, as you mentioned, Dante Culpepper, Randy Moss, Chris Carter, among a host of other folks. It was a tumultuous season. Corey Stringer, one of their offensive linemen, unfortunately died tragically of a heat stroke during training camp that year. And that was a super wild time that ended up being Coach Denny Green's last year as the coach after kind of an underwhelming season. It was a cool experience though, man. You gotta love the Midwestern fans when it comes to any sports, but particular football. That was probably the most enjoyable thing was, whether it was going to Soldier Field in Chicago or, hosting the Packers on a Monday night or something when Brett Favre was there. Like just the level of engagement with the fans was so different than what I was accustomed to living out in Oregon, where sports fans are pretty casual. Not so though.
No,
did a little snowmobiling on headed up to Lake Mille Lacs for some snowmobiling, a little fishing on Lake Minnetonka. I know the zones, Kev.
Oh yeah, that's the home waters. We spent a lot of time up there as a kid, and we really got into the outdoors by ice fishing. That was something that was like a 6th, 7th month deal at times in certain winters, right? And just that camaraderie and those little like shanty towns you have out on the ice. It was a cool way to grow up, and I certainly miss that. We have a little bit of ice fishing out here, but it's certainly not as rampant as the Midwest. Not as culturally relevant,
I was gonna say, like, Minnesota has always seemed very intriguing to me with like the ice shanties, like you were talking about, right? Like that's a legit thing. I've seen it in a lot of movies. Grumpier Old Men, great movies. But there's literally like you have a shack out on the ice.
Yeah, there's coffee shops, man. Like you drive out like 2-3 miles and there'll be like a little shack where you can get coffee and a burrito. And people have the new thing when I was like just out of high school is they started making these things called ice castles, which are like essentially like a toy hauler, right? But you'd have TVs, couches. Those people, you could never leave. You just stay there and you can make food, and it was pretty wild,
It's a weird thing because I've never ice fished before, and while the little towns and communities seem cool or whatever, it just doesn't seem that appealing personally. But I've never done it, and everybody I talk to is like, "Dude, it's so fun. You should really try it. You'd love it." I'm like, would I though? I don't know.
It's like like a lifestyle thing.
Yeah, for sure. As I was just gonna say is like if you can sort of take the like archery elk mindset out of the brain for a minute, and think about like, when we're hunting elk, it's like game on. There's not a lot of downtime, maybe a little bit in the mid morning or whatever. But ice fishing is sort of a leisure sport. A lot of beer drinking involved, a lot of card playing. And also it's so dark all the time, right? It's like you can't really do much outside, so you might as well be hanging out in the shanty, and we always call them just fish sacks and everything from like portable houses where you're pulling them behind a snowmobile to these really grand, $25,000-$30,000, fish shacks essentially that are like a house on wheels essentially.
So Kev, as you explored and made your way out west, you obviously had a good amount of years now to kind of compare and contrast whitetail Midwest hunting, turkey hunting, probably obviously waterfowl is decent in both areas. How does it lay out? Archery elk, November whitetails. What are you picking?
Archery elk every time. And I think the reason is I just like, I'd spent so much time whitetail hunting. I'm kind of like one of those guys that really likes to learn new stuff all the time. So I feel like I'm still learning how to be a efficient and great elk hunter. And the other thing about that too is like, I really think that there's a lot more that goes into, a successful archery elk hunt versus like a whitetail hunt in the tree. And I'll get tons of comments on that all the time about like, well, no, you just don't understand like a true blood, whitetail hunter. Because I think the way we define it at First Light is like the whitetail hunters are sort of like the scientists. They're very methodical. Their gear selection is dialed to the point where like, you understand exactly what goes in your left-hand breast pocket, right? Because you have to be stealthy and move differently. Whereas the elk hunters and the Western hunters are sort of like athletes. I think there's a lot that goes into this ability to climb 2,000 feet in the morning and, spend 7 days in the backcountry or whatever it may be. But yeah, I'm picking, I certainly love whitetail hunting. I spent probably 30 or 40 days in the tree last year. But I'll never miss archery elk hunting opener ever. It's just something I just love. And the other thing that's interesting too is the thing that drew me to elk hunting mostly is I was like, well, I really like calling geese and calling ducks. So the sort of the verbalization of making an animal do something you want by essentially communicating with them is something that I don't think you can replicate, you know. And I've been chasing that ever since I killed my first elk. I've been chasing this, like, okay, calling coyotes or you know, calling ducks that have been really pressured, whatever. I just think there's something about like making a herd bull do what you want them to do. It's just like, there's just nothing better, man.
Yeah.
We get a lot of folks, real quick, Case. I was gonna say, we get a lot of people that have followed along with our brand and our channel that have that, you know, that aspirational component to wanting to get out and elk hunt in the West. And many of them are like yourself, where they grew up predominantly whitetail hunting. And I think there's that, you know, question in your head, is that methodical scientist that's used to sitting in a tree, how does that translate into the West and being able to like effectively hunt elk with a bow, for example? What kind of like maybe 2 or 3 points of advice could you convey to those folks that are considering getting out West? They just haven't done it yet, whether that be, you know, from a lack of time, a lack of financials, or maybe just a lack of confidence in being able to go out West and try something new?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get that one a lot too. And the first thing I always tell people is like, just get boots on the ground. I think there's so many tools where you can e-scout via Onyx or whatever it may be. I think for me personally, the thing that really sort of pulled the trigger, or at least like got me going, was just being able to go with somebody. So even if you don't have a bow in your hand, I spent the first 2 seasons not hunting, just with people. You're going to figure out what, you know, what kind of gear you need, what sort of things you might need to be successful, without having the pressure of like, I just spent $1,000 on, you know, a tag and you know, a couple grand trying to get out here and buying all this gear. It's just like low pressure, you know. So spending some time in the country, and there's a lot of accessible states, you know, that aren't that far from the West, Colorado, you know, even parts of eastern Montana, things like that. And the other thing too is like the biggest translation I think whitetail hunters immediately get is the ability to understand wind. You know, coming from a whitetail background where, you know, you're playing wind based on a stationary position, the cool part is you can take all that knowledge and suddenly you just got to move 30 feet and suddenly your wind's right, or whatever it may be. So I think understanding how wind works in different topography, you know, we have pretty consistent thermal shifts in the West, and, you know, it depends on what time of the day and where you're at. But I think that's a really good thing to focus on. And then the third thing really is just like getting good boots, man. I can't tell you like how many times the guy comes out from wherever in the Midwest and has like a pair of lace-up boots that work great in October in the tree, but they're not going to get you through 7 days of steep and gross country. So just wearing your boots, you know, often, and really focusing in on what kind of feet you have. I think that leads to comfort. I really believe that if you're looking at you know, a body from feet to head, you can get away with cold hands, and you can get away with maybe being too hot with too many layers on the top. But like, if you don't have good boots, man, you're hosed, and it just becomes miserable. So that's kind of what I would say. And I, honestly, like the biggest point really is just being able to spend time in the country, you know, and take yourself out of this, like, I got to know every topo line and drainage and boundary from e-scouting, and just put some boots on the ground and look at what and where elk live too. I think that's a big deal. And it doesn't take much money or time. You know, you can do it in a weekend if you're close enough to Colorado, and spend some time in elk country. I think that really will sort of benefit you in the long run too, because this is a long game. You know, sometimes it takes 3-4 years to draw a tag.
I think like talking about comparing like whitetail hunting to elk hunting, I ran into some guys last year. We were out on an antelope hunt, and they drove from New York to Idaho to go elk hunting. And that was what they brought up was they all had trained. They knew it was going to be hard work, but they all had trained. But their 2 biggest takeaways were definitely the boots and how important the optics were. But also what they were talking about were where to find elk. Because what's intriguing to me is like vice versa of your story. We grew up here in the West hunting elk, and now we're going out east and experimenting with the whitetail world, right? And what I never understood about whitetail was you could literally have 40, 50 acres and have some legitimate shooter bucks on that property. And they won't go far from that 40 or 50 acres. And so I think growing up whitetail hunting, you're looking at these little plots and little pieces and like, these are where the bucks are at. And we just got to figure out a way to kill them. Well, when people ask me, like, how do you find the elk? I'm like, you find the elk where you find the elk. Like, elk don't stay in 40 or 50 acres. They could for a while, a day or two. And then the next day they could be 20 miles down the drainage.
Yeah, if you think about their history, right, they're originally a plains animal.
For sure.
And a herd plains animal that was nomadic. So I think even if you get into some of the country that we live in where it's nasty and mean, they know how to live there. So and they're also super mobile and they can run a long way if they're pushed out of an area. But that's a great point. And I think the difference too between like whitetail country and elk country is sometimes you find bucks, you know, bedded in the best country because that's all they've got off a highway or whatever. When here, you know, you've got millions of acres of public ground, and they can go anywhere. All they need is food, water, shelter, and that really is a game changer. And I always tell guys too, like there's this whole like mythology, right, that you got to go like 14 miles into the backcountry to find elk. It's just not true, man. I killed all my elk, I think. Yeah, the majority of all my elk have been like that 2 to 3 mile range from the trailhead, because everybody just bombs, you know, they want to get like far away from people, but sometimes the best country is just, you know, a couple miles in.
Dude, I've been doing this for a long time and I 100% agree with you. And I call it that buffer zone. You got the guys that are going to hunt real close to the trails. You know, they might not be able to get around that great. And then you're going to have the guys that are like, we have to get 8 miles in before we even start hunting. So you have like, you know, you could have 4 to 5 miles of stuff that's not getting touched besides just people walking through it to get to that, you know, where the elk are. And we always call it the buffer zone. So anytime we show up somewhere, I look at those areas and say, okay, these were, you know, the road warriors are going to be, these were the backcountry guys are going to be. Let's go look at this stuff in between. And a lot of times that's where the elk are.
Yeah. And you get such a great experience too. If you're a fresh elk hunter, you're still going to get that like wilderness experience 2 to 3 miles in, you know, but you don't have to break your back and bring 17 different mountain houses for a, you know, 7-day trip and be pretty light and fast. You know, the other thing I'll say too, just with regard to like whitetail versus Western hunting is like, you won't find me like taking many breaks in the elk woods. Like you can hunt those things all day long, I think. Whereas like whitetail guys get kind of pigeonholed by like, if you got a 40-acre chunk of ground and you have a bad wind, you can't hunt that spot. But in elk country, you're able to be so mobile and move around and kind of like learn the topography and use it to your advantage that you kind of get a fuller experience, I think, with not having to have a place to rest or not, you know, you can make the wind work in your advantage, you know.
I think being nimble is a really good tactic for anybody coming out west, because, you know, when you are e-scouting, you're developing maybe a plan A or so, and oftentimes you get kind of hung up on, well, this is where I scouted. And I've always told people, be nimble, you know, be willing to move around, because your plan A may eventually lead to a plan D where you find elk because of people, pressure, sign, you name it. And, you know, to your point, Kev, if you're hiking in 8 or 10 miles and then there's no elk there, you're burning a ton of time, energy. And, you know, oftentimes you're going to be short on the ability to get into any elk before your hunt's over. If you only have a week you're dealing with. And I think another interesting component is I've got some good buddies that all grew up in the Midwest and have come out, you know, to Idaho or Montana, and they've been really successful elk hunters. And I think that methodical, you know, component of whitetail hunting where you're so dialed into sign and wind can translate great in the Western woods for picking up elk sign that's fresh, you know, whether that's tracks, scat, rubs, you name it. Having that attention to detail of that sign can be really advantageous. And then a lot of times, so many whitetail / turkey guys are pretty dialed in with a diaphragm call, you know, mostly from the turkey woods. And so being able to learn how to blow an elk bugle and a cow call, it ends up being pretty easy, really, for a lot of folks, just because they grew up their whole life chasing turkeys all summer or all spring. So I think there's a lot of skill sets that transfer pretty well. And I'm so on board with what you said, is just boots on the ground goes a long ways. You can certainly learn a lot, you know, looking at OnX maps and such, but getting there and verifying what you think you know is so critical, because a lot of times, a road that appears to be a pretty easy road on the map ends up being nothing more than like an overgrown 2-track that you can't get through. And there's so many things you just don't know until you show up, and being able to verify is key.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to do too. You can kind of like take a family vacation and maybe throw a day on either end of it somewhere where you can bring your family along and make it fun, and I think we're so blessed with so much public access here that there's just, you can't go wrong. You don't have to drive very far to find elk, and especially hunting them during the rut with a bow, it's not rocket science. We fail a lot, but that's just learning. You're gonna kind of add that to your quiver of knowledge, and it's cool to just be around elk too at different times of the year. That's the other part. Understand how they move through country in the spring versus the fall, and summer versus the winter. I think that's an interesting point that not a lot of people figure out. We got this guy here that you guys know, Duke, that watches mule deer for like 250 days a year, and so he understands what a buck does, not just in October and November, but in January and June and May and all across the gamut. So just understanding the critter, I think you can learn a lot about how to kill them.
I think another valid point, or something I like to tell people when they talk to me about, elk hunting, is you're going to come out and most likely you're going to get your butt kicked the first couple of years. Like, I don't know too many guys that have killed elk their first, second, third, or even fourth year. It takes some time. So I tell people all the time, like, when you're looking at an area to go hunt, a lot of guys will put in for the draws and this and that, but I always would look for an area it's an area that you're going to be able to hunt continuously, like every year, because I think that's very important to get in, not just learn about elk hunting, but learn about elk hunting in that area, because a lot of elk do different things. I've hunted elk up in the tops of above tree line. I've hunted elk down in, the sagebrush, and they all act a little bit different. And so I feel like if you find an area that you can hunt continuously every year, you're going to be years ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah. It took me, I think, 4 seasons to kill a bull, and I was living in elk country, like out my back door. So yeah, I can't get discouraged, man. And I think the cool part too is there's so much banter and kind of garbage out there about like killing the biggest bull or like, killing the herd bull. I think you can work up to that, right? But any elk is a great elk. They all taste great. So yeah, go to places with a cow tag too. I mean, or
for sure,
whatever it is, no limitations, right?
So Kev, you mentioned earlier you've been with First Light around 2 years.
Yep.
They First Light's a relationship. For those of you that are listening along, if you followed us for any amount of time, you would know that First Light is a company we've worked with for a lot of years, and arguably one of the first 3 companies, I think, that we actually graduated above and beyond getting like a free product and made it into like a true business relationship. And I know the history runs deep from when Kenton and Scott founded the brand into kind of what they've grown into over the years. And I mean, I'd say arguably, Casey can speak to this too, but probably one of our favorite partnerships we've ever had. And I know a lot of that personally has come down to just the evolution of the product continuing to get better and better each year. But, more than anything, I would say like the people component at First Light is really hard to match. And, one of our sayings when we started doing this business is we weren't just trying to cash in and make money from these brand deals or partnerships. It was truthfully like hand picking companies where we really believed in the product, but then we also believed in the people behind the product. And those 2 criteria really were the guiding force behind why we chose the brands that we're currently working with today. And, we feel pretty proud of the fact that in the 5 or 6 years of doing this, we've really had virtually no disruption in those partnerships. So the people component is a huge deal. And I think, the culture that Kenton and Scott created, along with so many others that were originally there, is really unique. What was your impression jumping into that company, in what you've seen in the last couple of years? How could you explain it from like an insider's perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first and foremost, the kind of the story I can tell is that when I came into interview, right, there was like a cajillion people that wanted the job. I'm sure it's like a great job. And when I came into interview, they weren't asking me questions. The crew wasn't asking me questions about like, what I could do on the work side, right? That was already determined because of an application and a resume and whatever. They knew I was capable of the work. What they asked questions about were like, what did I spend my time doing? Where did I come from? What was my most, badass hunt to date? What did I like to do in the spring when there wasn't a season going on? So I think that the way in which we've always hired people has been really sort of foundationalized in this approach to determine that our culture remain no matter how big we are. No matter if it's 4 guys working in the garage with some dogs to now at 30 people and partnered with a lot of different brands from ownership to our outbound stuff. I think it really comes down to we hire people that fit the mold. And I think that sense and that level of commitment and collaboration, you get a really interesting buy-in from all the employees. We've only had basically 2 full-time employees ever leave the company in 12 years. And one of which, Cal moved on to Meat Eater, right? I mean, it's the same family. Yeah. So I can't, in any business I've worked in, I've never seen that sort of retainment of folks. And I think it's because of, our commitment to taking care of our people for sure. But the other part is everybody really believes in what we're doing it. From our customer service guys all the way to our president, everybody in that spectrum of employment is part of the crew. We have conversations about gear with dudes that don't work in product, that have some insight because they're out there, 100 days a year. So I think from it, insider's perspective, the culture is sort of the foundation of why we can create better gear, because, we've got guys that during hunting season at like 4:55, that door is swinging, right? Nobody's there. Everybody's in the woods. The company was founded by hunters and continues to be run and managed and employed with hunters. Another thing too is everybody just gets along really well. We have similar interests, but we have diverse interests too. We've got really strong backcountry skiers and guys that have killed sheep in the Frank Church. And there's really no ego with that, right? For instance, like the guy that runs our e-commerce and that side of marketing is a Division I like champion ski racer, right? But most humble guy in the world. He's just doing his job and loves to be around the guys in the office. And conversely, we've got people that have been and killed sheep in Alaska or giant elk in Oregon or 200-inch mule deer in Idaho. But that's not really the focus, right? It's just like they're doing it because they love to do it, not because they want to tell you how good they are at it. And it's been really one of the most special places I've ever worked for that reason, because I think that you can get tips and tactics while also understanding how to be a better marketing company. It's just like intertwined in everything we do. And that's a pretty special thing. I don't think you find that very many other places.
Yeah, that's awesome. When you can have your higher level employees like that and your employees all on the same page with that drive and passion, that's what puts you on that next level. And I think you guys have that exactly.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's always like, you're talking about they were just trying to fit the mold when they hired you. And I agree 100%. From what I've seen over the years is you'll have the CEO out fly fishing with the customer service representative and everything in between, right?
Yeah, there's really no like hierarchy, right? Of like,
the
directors don't hang out with the directors and the CS guys. It's just everybody's got different friend groups and things within the company, but it's not like there's no hierarchy or structure that way. Which is pretty cool. You can pop into Ross's office at any time of the day, just tell a story about your dog having his first point on a chucker or whatever, and it's like no big deal, right?
Yeah.
So Kev, real quick, for maybe people not as familiar with the history of First Lite, give us like a quick kind of overview of how Kent and Scott founded the company and kind of up to where we are today.
Yeah, you bet. So I think it's about 12 years ago now, 11, 12 years, Kenton and Scott started a company, here in Ketchum, Idaho. They lived here and both worked here in other forms of work. But they had this idea that there was a lot of good backcountry products made by like Arc'teryx and, Smart Wool and all these other companies that were talking about performance versus concealment. And they thought, well, why don't we make merino wool, printed in camo? Because the product merino wool, the way we sort of brought that to the world is that, it's the most, or more, I would say the best performing material for extended day, whatever you're doing. Could be backcountry skiing, hunting, fishing, whatever. It doesn't stink. It's warm when you're wet, dries quickly. So they had this concept of like, let's make merino wool for hunters, and started the company, and then grew from there into merino base layers with printed on like real tree and ASAT and all these other things, and then slowly graduated into making outerwear and developing our own patterns that were based on the West, and now in the Midwest with whitetail patterns. And from there, we've initially synced up this relationship with Meat Eater with Steve, as sort of a talking head and an advocate for what we were doing. And Steve came to the brand much like you guys did, with an emphasis in quality of gear, but also quality of people. And then from there, Meat Eater and First Light joined about a year and a half ago now, right after I started, actually. And then we've added brands like FHF and Phelps Calls and things like that to this family of brands that really are focused in on, basically making the best gear in their category, but also having a really tight-knit cultural emphasis to perpetuate the lifestyle of hunting, fishing, and really bringing new people in the fold. And I think that's the thing that we've seen now is, we were founded on this emphasis of conservation, right? Like, we're one of the only brands that really cared to put our money where our mouth is, and gave dollars to specific organizations that we thought were doing a good job. Things like BHA, the Teddy Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, Rocky Mountain Elk, and the Wildlife Federation, things like that, where they're doing good work on the ground, that if we continue to perpetuate this lifestyle of hunting, those organizations are the ones that are making sure that the gate's open, right? So from there, we've taken this conservation ethos and sort of elevated that to the point where the focus of our company now is to bring new people to the fold. There's a lot that we can do as hunters with the advent of social media and larger communication forums to be able to really be a voice for our industry, and bringing new hunters in the fold. And what we've seen is like this just onslaught of people trying to figure out how to get food, how to not rely on a grocery store, how to even grow your own veggies, but also like secure your own meat for the freezer. And I think that's going to be the sort of the next step, right? Is like, how do we adequately speak to those people and bring them in the fold, no matter if you're from Southern Louisiana or the mountains of Idaho or Minneapolis, Minnesota, whatever it may be, like, they're welcome here. And we want to make gear for those people, and as well as the guys that are going on a 15-day sheep hunt in the Brooks Range, right? We've really covered that well. And that was really the last thing I'll say about that is, I think the culture was founded because Scott and Kenton wanted to have a company that brought people in the fold, but also made good gear and did it well, did everything well, not just like the gear or not just the people, but everything. They demanded excellence, and certainly grew this business into a sort of a monstrosity that's a sort of a source for good, in our industry.
Talk a little bit about the conservation side of things, and particularly, I guess, as you've, I think over this past year, I can't remember the details of it, but the company has something in place to where if employees like yourself introduce a new hunter, there's some kind of a potential benefit for you guys. Walk us through what that looks like. I think it's a cool concept, just to, again, get new folks into hunting.
Yeah, so we always have a lot of questions. A lot of our employees have pretty good social media followings and things like that, where people come to them and say like, hey, how do I get into this? And how do I not just buy a t-shirt or buy, a puffy jacket, but how do I actually like become a hunter? So Forward Van Fossen runs conservation for us here at First Light. And he conceptualized this program in which everybody across all our partner brands within the media organization, if you take a new hunter or introduce somebody to hunting, you don't have to kill an elk, or you don't have to limit out on ducks. You just got to bring them out and have them be part of that world. You're sort of entered to win these different prizes and sort of accolades throughout the company. And I think since we started the program, we've probably introduced like maybe like 40 or 50 new people to hunting just this year across the
Wow.
brand, which is pretty remarkable, man. And I think that's important, not just from a a marketing potential gain, right? To like bring people in the fold of our brand. That's obviously what we want to try to accomplish too. But really, it just brings people into this fold that, like, if you want to hunt, you have to be concerned about conservation. You have to be concerned about public lands. You have to be concerned about treating private lands well and forming relationships with landowners. So we're trying to educate people not just about how to shoot a rifle or how to lace your boots correctly for the woods, but like what can you do to be a steward of this industry and this sort of ethos of gaining access to food around the country.
Yeah, this industry has been, ever since I was a kid, I've heard this industry talk about getting new hunters involved, right? I think a lot of times, and especially for me, I had a long conversation with Ford the other day about doing some conservation projects, and he brought up a very valid point. But to me, in my head, I was always thinking like, that's the youth, right? Like, we got to get new hunters involved. And for me, I've got 4 kids, so that makes sense, but always like passing it down. But Ford brought up a very good point of, the people that, the youth are very important. We need to, pass this torch down to them and so they can continue it. But also those middle-aged people, the 20 pluses that, like you said, are looking for, more organic or better ways to source their own food. And so he brought up a very valid point, and it opened my eyes as well. But those are the people that we really need to be focusing on, as well as the kids.
Yeah, because I think like the importance for kids is certainly has a great leverage for the future, right? That's incredibly important. But the guys that are like 25 to 50 or 60 or however old, those are the people that can create direct action and sort of like change their mindset immediately, right?
Yeah.
With kids, it takes a lot of time. You got to drive them everywhere. You got to bring them along, and that's all important. And I think that you see that in hunting families, of course. But what you see from the sort of this, what we're calling like middle-aged folks, or outside of being a young kid, there's some very interesting ways in which they can contribute immediately to the betterment of what we like to do. There's a guy named Jesse Griffiths who we're just with down in Texas, who's got this cooking school called the New School of Traditional Cookery, where he takes folks that are from New York, LA, Austin, wherever, and basically teaches them how to hunt, how to butcher, how to cook. And that has just incredible and astounding results as far as like those guys joining conservation organizations and really like becoming part of their lifestyle. And that's that direct action that Ford's talking about, is if you want to make things happen now, seems like the way to do it will be through these like folks that are just a little bit older and maybe have a little bit more ability to just hit the ground running,
I think it's great too that older demographic is one that's going to be speaking with a lot of their other friends and family members and coworkers. And if they had a positive hunting experience and they learned, above and beyond maybe what their stereotype was of hunting previous to that experience, it could be really beneficial in so many ways, from the conservation component of it, just to the food component of it, to frankly the political component of it. I mean, I think this year, in the last 2 months, the amount of new legislation drafted across so many different states that would really have an adverse effect on hunting has been pretty overwhelming. And, one of the things that we've kind of been recognizing and learning is that wholeheartedly, there's some folks that have been doing this a long time in a hunting community that are pretty dialed in on the politics of it and kind of the lobbying of it. But overwhelmingly, I'd say there's more of us that are not that good at it. We don't know that much about it. And we're kind of set up to lose because of our lack of knowledge and experience. Where if you look at some of these other lobbying groups that maybe are behind some of these bills that are being introduced, they're pretty good at it. This is kind of what they do for a living. They know how to get a bill introduced as what was an idea and then get it through legislation and potentially transferred into a law that could have a negative impact on hunting. So again, the more positivity we can spread into maybe those outlying communities that were historically backcountry skiers, or, a rock climber, or just an individual that really likes to eat food and, butcher, but they've never experienced hunting, all of that stuff could be super advantageous as we continue to experience more of these interesting bills that are being introduced. So tons of benefit, from that side of the world too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like one of the things that I sort of have as a founding ethos for what I try to accomplish just in my own life is like I can talk at somebody around a kitchen table and serve them food that I killed. But the formidable thing for somebody to gain perspective is through experience, right? They have to see what went into that to really appreciate it. So like I believe you can change perspective just based on really like true experience. And that's something we can do on a day-to-day level, even if it's, I just took a neighbor of mine out with me yesterday to work my new bird dog, and just watching the dog point birds. This guy who's never hunted before was like, wow, that's incredible. Like this relationship between you and your dog. And that sort of perspective shifted, right? From just like, oh, it's just a dog, to like, oh, he's actually like, there's a purpose here. And I think that can translate into, elk, deer, whatever kind of hunting, to really kind of full circle it up.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, Renella's always done a really good job with, I guess we'd call them the REI crowd, right? Like maybe they were into mountain biking, maybe they were into, hiking, fishing, whatever, but they weren't hunting. And like you're saying, there's so many different ways to bring people in. If it's through food, if it's through adventure, if it's through like, getting a dog, watching how it works, all of them are very important. And it's no lie that we need to get people involved. Like I look at numbers all the time and what they come out with, and they're declining, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are.
And big time.
I think, yeah. And that's the thing is like the only way, like at a very base level, the only way that we get to continue to hunt is if people participate. And there's a way to do it where you're not spot burning every place you go to, and not like bringing thousands of people to your honey hole. Really what you want to do is just set the foundation so they can go explore and figure out what it is they want to try to find or do or see in the woods, But you're right. I mean, hunter numbers are certainly, in certain states, it's not great, because I think the barrier to entry has become pretty vast for a lot of people.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's very intimidating to get to a point in your life, never doing something, then all of a sudden being like, hey, I want to try this out. But I think there's so many good avenues out there. But if it's, not part of like why we do what we do is this, like we call them our 3 pillars. And one of those 3 pillars of why we created Hush was new hunter recruitment. Right. But I think between us and companies like you, and even like people like Randy Newberg and Renell, like we have some good people out there that are promoting this sport, I feel like, in the right way.
Absolutely, man. And I think like I always look at it like I try to take something that I don't really do, like let's say golf, right? Not a big golfer. So for me, it's like, okay, how do I get the clubs? Where do I go? Do I tuck my shirt in here? Do I not? Like, how do I get a t-shirt? Like all this shit that's like way outside my perspective or scope. I would, if someone were to take me immediately, that's like 50% less stressful. And I think if we get people to that point, then it becomes like, okay, now they're out doing it themselves because they enjoy it,
All right. So Kev, I got to know, director of community, you're over a lot of different folks, whether that be the guide, outfitter program, or that term influencer that is so, I don't know, I'm not sure if people love it or hate it these days, but there's a lot of people that are wanting to get into the industry, Kev. They've got a hunting YouTube channel or an Instagram page or a TikTok these days, or God knows what. What kind of advice do you give to this younger crowd that is trying to get quote unquote sponsored? What does that look like these days? Because so the way our like timeline hit the hunting industry, the timing was pretty ideal in the essence that television and print were kind of the only things being paid like media wise. So we were battling against, the television component of marketing budgets and the print component. And I think in a way, like it was challenging because we were new, this digital concept of YouTube and Instagram, it never existed. We were so on the front end of it. So our challenge was breaking down the barrier of like, how do we get these companies to understand that we do provide value, but these are in these, new digital buckets that nobody has a lot of insight on. Well, now, you fast forward 5 or 6 years, the pendulum has certainly swung more to the digital side, but with that has come a lot of other people doing it. So I think, their saturation levels are way higher in digital spaces. So now if you're a newer person or people or brand trying to enter into this industry, things are pretty saturated, So what's the guy got to do these days to get a partnership in place? Like, what does that look like now? Because it looks so different than where we were 5 years ago.
Yeah, certainly it's transitioned from like traditional public relations work to digital marketing essentially. So I think the first question you probably ask yourself is like, is this something that I really want to mix, like work and play, right? So I know a lot of dudes that are just elk assassins, right? That don't give a shit about Instagram, right?
Yep.
And that's a really special thing. And I want to make that clear because in our job, we sort of mix our passion and our work. So we don't really there's no split between the two, right? I may be gone 150 days a year in the field, but that doesn't mean I'm just hunting, right? I'm writing shot lists and working on perpetuating our brand and meeting with people and setting up contracts and all these different things that are sort of in sync with what we're doing in the field. So it's not always like rainbows and kittens, right? I mean, we're not just all like out elk hunting for fun. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into that. And I think for people that are coming up, the ones that we get a lot of requests every day, like, hey, look at my reel or look at my whatever. But what I'm looking at is really the balance of partnership. So we can either, from our end, we can invest in someone that we feel is a good character, that brings a lot of insight and a lot of knowledge to the world. And we can sort of produce them and put them out into the world. Or someone can come to us and say, hey, this is my media plan. This is my reach. This is what I'm trying to accomplish. This is the hunts I'm going on. And we can figure out a partnership there. I think the hardest part for a lot of people is they send like an email. It's hard to get a hold of people. And there's just so much stuff on YouTube and across social that, it's probably a lot of it's really good. For us, it's about bandwidth and managing that too. And how does that fit into our marketing plan? A great example is these dudes from Nebraska called Identical Draw. It's a small couple of brothers that really started as sort of a content creation company. They do video, photo, whatever. But what they did is they recognized that a large part of what First Lite's trying to accomplish is this new hunter mentorship program. So they actually started a separate LLC in which they're going to bring people into the field every year, like 11 to 15 people. And that's going to be the focus of their business. So then I see an alignment with what we're trying to do, where they're going, and suddenly there's a partnership there, And if you want to be rich in the hunting industry, man, it's not easy to be an influencer, right? We're not talking, these are not like millions of dollars going out the door every day. I gotta let my dog out. Pause. Sorry, she's kind of annoying sometimes. She's pretty young.
That's good. She lets you know though.
Oh yeah. She is a good dog. She's sometimes a puppy still, which is good.
Yeah.
So these Identical Draw guys really came and were sort of forward thinking in what they brought to the table, right? And I think rather than just saying, hey, sponsor me, I've got 1 million YouTube views or whatever it may be, that's exciting to me from one end because your reach is great and giant. But really what I'm looking for is like a long-standing holistic partnership that provides each party with some sort of benefit, right? And when it comes down to like, how do I get sponsored or how do I like make a career in the outdoor industry? I think that you got to have the passion for it. You have to be a good speaker, a good writer, a good reader, and also an advocate for the types of things that we're trying to sort of move forward as a brand. Because there's a lot of different competitors out there that have different ethos than us. And maybe sometimes those are a better fit for somebody who has a different mindset of where they want to go. So the short answer is there's not really a perfect model, but like in most things, it's like who you know, right? So we find a lot of our, I guess, team members or influencers or whatever you want to call them through recommendations from guys like you or Born and Raised or Steve or whoever that, is maybe went on a duck hunt with a guy or something like that. I think that's really just about trying to kind of put your boots on the ground and sort of build something that's exciting to you first. And then present it to a brand for consideration,
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. Why am I so echoey? Oh, Yeah, very valid point. We have a lot of people that reach out to us and are like, "Hey, man, I've got this channel. Like, how do we get started? How do we do it? Like, where do like they just want to know." And we've always been open books. I've always thought that since I started this channel, in 2011, the more people that are doing this on this platform, the better it'd be for everybody because it would bring more eyeballs. So we've told anybody that's ever asked, we've told. But I think that's the most important part is why. Like, why do you want to create outdoor content? Is it to become rich? Because that's probably not going to happen. Is it to become famous? What is famous? Like, why do you want to create this stuff? And for us, like I said, we have the 3 pillars, and it's very true. We grew up passionate about the outdoors, and we when we started doing this, I'm like, okay, I'm passionate about the outdoors. What else? What's more? What else are we trying to do? And so our 3 pillars, and we've said this many times on this podcast, but one is new hunter, fisherman acquisition, like getting more people excited about the outdoors. Second is conservation. Whatever that might look, we want to help give back to conservation, right? So we're coming over there April to do your bucks for brush.
Yep.
With you guys, which is super cool. Anyways, there's just to give back for whatever, like if it's a boys' home, if it's a children's hospital, whatever it might be, we want to help out that way. But through those 3 whys, that gives us our purpose. If everything we do is have something to do with those 3 things, I feel like we're going to be successful.
And I think that's what's attractive. Obviously, like, you got to be good people. You got to do things the right way. And what I'm looking for really is people like yourself that have an emphasis in the why. Because regardless if they're working with First Light or not, they're going to be doing what they're doing, and that's something that's really cool. Like, I don't want a cookie cutter guy that's like, I'll do whatever you want me to do. Like, we don't have time to like do that for folks, right? It's got to be about like this emphasis into like, I'm going into the world, into the hunting world, and I'm doing this stuff, and it's really cool. It's also founded by some really cool ethos. That's kind of what we look at too.
I think a lot of folks just need to remember too that, like anything, man, it's a process. Our brand is a great example of that. 2011. So we're at our 10-year anniversary this year of the brand being actually like created. And
Nice.
it took a couple years just before even videos started getting put onto the channel. So that leads us to 2013. And then, Eric and myself didn't join Casey until like 2014, 2015. And so then you look like the next phase of business. When we all started this, we had virtually no audience whatsoever anywhere. It was new. It was early on in the stages, but over time and with consistency and momentum and hard work, the audience has grown. So we didn't have like an intent to be like, oh, we need to achieve this amount of like followers or subscribers. Like, it had nothing it just organically happened. I think a lot of it was because we did enjoy the why behind why we, the brand, and there was more to it than, there was never a goal of trying to make X dollars or gain X subscribers. That just organically came, through time.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of other folks just have to realize that it's important to build something first before you go out and start asking for things versus, the contrary, where you're asking for something with an idea behind it that it will happen. And so for anybody, that's listening, that's trying to build something, just go build it. Get that library of content, like lay the groundwork for what you're trying to create. And then when the timing is right, and that might be, depending on what you have going on as a side hustle or whatever, that could be 6 months or it could be 6 years before you're ready to kind of like present the foundation, and turn that into that business component of it. And I think, that's just something to continue to remember is go build it. I think people get a little bit premature with asking for things before they've ever created anything. And so if you're sitting in Kevin's shoes or, many other brands that are entertaining just an influx of emails and calls and, hey, look at my stuff. If you don't have any foundation, you're probably not going to get very far down past that initial email because there's just nothing really there to go off of.
Right. I'm going to pause it right there just for a sec so I can bring her back in before she gets hit by a rig. Stand by.
Just running wild on the back porch.
Dude, what is that picture that's just been behind Kevin? What's going on there?
Kevin's 3 great grandmothers.
Is it really?
Yeah. Came across the plains, founded Ketchum.
That's Betty Lou, Dorothy, and Doris.
All right, we got to ask you.
It's been burning a hole in my brain this whole time. What do we got going on behind you there, Kev? What is that picture?
Oh, can you see it okay? Or should I zoom in here?
I got it. We have some theories.
You want me to tell you? Or you want to hear the theories first?
Give them your theory case.
I said your 3 great grandmothers that came across the plains and found a Ketchum, right?
That's right. That's close, kind of. No, so these 3 women, there's this town in Eastern Oregon called Troy. It's right on the Grand Ronde River. You guys have probably floated by it. And there's a dude so the town was founded as a part of Wallowa County, but not a lot of people live there. It's really like in the boonies. Most people came from like Dayton, Washington, and came across that way. And there's this guy, this photographer named Harlander, who bought himself a camera and came to Wallowa County and shot portraits of people in Troy back in the day. And these are probably like the only, I don't know who these women are. I know they lived in Troy and they're probably related, people that live there now, but this guy took these photographs, and then I think it's his grandson or his great grandson is this guy named Orvis Moore, who lives in Troy. And when I was on a fire down there, we were getting this guy out of his house because his house was going to burn down. And he said, okay, well, I'm only leaving if you get my guns and my photos. We're like, oh my God. So we're like going through this guy's underwear drawer, grabbing all this shit, and come out with just stacks of old rifles and everything. And turns out these photos were like original prints in like his underwear drawer that a friend of mine, David Weaver, found.
Wow.
So when I was working at the brewery, we got a bunch of these photos with his blessing and blew them up on these hangers and put them up around the restaurant, just as like a historic reminder of like what these people did. You know, I mean, it's kind of cool. She's got like a bag of wine, it must be, or whiskey or something, and then a double shot shotgun there, and then a single shot shotgun there with 3 grouse. So they just
those are grouse.
Yeah, they're grouse. And they're certainly like, this is a totally staged photo, like Sunday best, right? Horses in the background. But there's some just incredible photographs from that time period. There's like a dude with like 6 mountain lions in front of a cabin, and it's just like, it's just wild, man. And I've always been really, I love photography, and I think just finding old photos like this is just pretty remarkable.
Different times, man.
Going back to what we were just talking about, like old photography, old like hunting pictures, I think are the coolest thing in the world. Like looking back at like even when my dad was, you know, a kid and hunting with his brother and his dad, I think are the coolest things. And so I tell people that, like when they like, I want to start a YouTube channel, I'm like, you really should, even if you never get a sponsorship or it gets no views. Think about how cool that will be one day, that maybe your great grandkids won't be able to just go look at a picture of you hunting, but you'll have a whole film, or you'll have a whole series of films. Like, I think that's very intriguing. I tell people that all the time. Like, yeah, I've been wanting to film. I'm like, what's stopping you? Do it.
Yeah, just do it. Yeah, and I think that's really cool. Just the change in which it went from like journals to photographs to moving images to like films to YouTube to whatever it is. And it'll be interesting to see, like, you know, my grandkids in like, you know, a million years or whatever are gonna have like TikToks of their grandma or whatever, you know. It's just
holographic funny
TikToks.
Yeah, that's right.
Now explain the pictures.
I don't have a TikTok though. I'll be clear about that.
Good for you. Case, now explain the pictures behind you. What do we got there?
So I've been working on my art. This is some art I've done over the last couple months. I've been really working on staying in the lines. My 2 youngest like to draw pictures and come put them on the wall. I think it's pretty
awesome. Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. So for those in the audio only component of this podcast, we're eavesdropping in. Kevin's got some obviously cool old photos he just described behind him, and then Casey's got some of his kids' artwork adorning his backdrop, which is pretty cool. Yeah, I was back home this Christmas, and I was digging through some old photos my dad had, and his dad, who unfortunately passed away at an early age, had some super cool like black and white old photos that were from the 60s. And he and some of his cousins and friends and stuff road trip from Yakima, Washington, all the way to eastern Montana to do their first pronghorn hunt. And it was just like a convoy of these old Jeeps, and they just road tripped all the way over there. Some really fascinating pictures. They all killed pronghorn, and couple like one of the Jeeps like acts like rolled over, was doing some four wheeling and stuff. I'm just thinking, man, what would that have looked like back in the 60s?
Yeah.
It's just stacked full of people in the Jeep, not a comfortable ride. It was cool, man, to have like those are some precious keepsakes, for our families. It's those old photographs
absolutely.
of Gramps.
You never see dinks either, like all these old photographs is just like Mondo bucks and like
Giants.
350-inch bulls. You're like, and this guy killed it with like a, like a Henry's rifle,
Yeah.
You're just like, wow, it's cool. And maybe it was just like film, you didn't take photos of stuff that wasn't extravagant maybe or something, but they don't seem like they're certainly not staged or whatever. But some of those like, there's like a couple of Instagram pages that are really cool that have like old school hunting photos. And you're just like, God, there's some giants.
They probably didn't pack the heads out unless they were giants back then. I've heard so many stories of people that are like, yeah, my dad would never let me pack the heads out. And I shot like multiple 30-inch bucks. Jeez. And you just can't eat them horns. And they throw them in the bushes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's wild. We had a lot of stories in Eastern Oregon where guys would be like, yeah, my granddad always passed up these giant bulls and shot cows or yearlings, because they're like food focused, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which is really cool. Really cool. You're starting to see that a little bit now too,
All right, Kev. So today is the 16th of March. It's a historical day in history of First Light. In the essence of that, it's 2021 product drop. So what are the hot new items that the audience can expect to see for 2021?
Oh man, I'm stoked. We've been waiting on these things. I've had these pants for like almost 2 years. We've been working on for a long time conceptually and in protos and across the board. And so really stoked to introduce the Foundry lineup, which is basically a build out of some really core pants that we've had for a long time. So we'll have the Obsidian, the Corrugate, and the Catalyst Foundry. These are all hybrid pants, which if listeners aren't familiar, that's basically a hybrid pant melds different kinds of materials together versus having just a merino pant or just a nylon pant. So the Obsidian Foundry basically is a rework of some of the Obsidian pants that we've had in the past that had issues of durability or certainly wear out factor. With a merino wool, you're not going to get 100 years out of it for sure. So they're reinforced through basically the inner thigh section around the lower leg and across the seat. And that's going to be reinforced with a 4-way stretch nylon. So they're still going to breathe incredibly well like a merino wool pant should, but the merino is just in the right places. Some added durability there. So you might be able to get you could take a nasty Texas hunt or something like that and actually get through the briars in these things potentially. The other two are the ones that I'm really excited about because they feature quite a bit of improvement, I guess, to the original, right? So the Corrugate guide pants have a first and foremost a zipper on the side that essentially is going to allow you to heat dump, and so they've got this side zipper essentially that runs from the top of the hip to just above the knee, and that's going to allow you to dump heat on a hot hunt, as well as basically allow you to access the inside of your pants. If you want to start off a zip off long john or something like that, it allows you access to the inside of the pant. They're also going to have, which is something I'm really stoked about, and it's kind of a love or hate thing. A lot of people, we're talking about knee pads here, right? So they've got an insertion in across the knee where you can put in or take out a knee pad. It's closed cell foam, which is incredibly moldable to your knee. And it's going to act like it's not even there. It's super lightweight, super functional if you're stalking antelope or even if you're crouching, for a mule deer or drop it to your knee for a shot. Those pants are also reinforced with our sawbuck material across the knee and across the seat. They're going to offer a lot of durability. I wore those down in Texas this last week, 75 degrees and sunny. We're sweating a lot, but the pants weren't too hot, which is pretty cool. So that'll take you basically mid-season, I would say, and even into later archery elk hunts, all the way into a later season pant. And then the ones I think I'm most stoked about, just because I spent a lot of time in kind of adverse climates. These Catalyst Foundry pants are built off of one of my favorite pairs of pants that we make, that fleece line Catalyst pant. And these Catalyst Foundry pants are going to feature a full zipper from hip to boot, as well as that fleece liner. They're also going to feature a waterproof seat and lower leg. And then they're going to have that 4-way stretch material as well. So they're going to be super comfy. They seat really nicely on your boot too. It's sort of a tapered fit. And both all these pants will come in tall varieties as well for some of the dudes that are lanky and long. And they'll also be featured in rigid sizing. So like if you were a 32 Wrangler, you probably wear a 32 in these pants. Really stoked about them. They're just bomb proof. We talk a lot about trying to improve and push the needle on some of our gear from concept to development to actual product in the market. This is something, I've been excited about a lot of products at First Light, but these things are going to change the game for sure.
So for those listening, if over the years, I think historically we've kind of leaned into the corrugate guide pant probably overwhelmingly for running from, let's say, August up through honestly October in a lot of cases. It's been kind of the go-to, and the corrugate lights have worked their way into some of the early season stuff for sure. And then the traditional Catalyst pants, real nice kind of late season. We had a chance to run these prototypes throughout the season, and particularly the corrugate foundry pant and then the Catalyst foundry pant were the two primary ones that we spent time in by the time we received them. And I think it's definitely like a nice addition to the lineup. When Logan and I were in Kodiak, I ran the Catalyst foundry pant for a number of days, and definitely bomb proof is a great way to describe those ones, banging through all the thick brush of Kodiak on that deer hunt. I didn't go with the knee pad option in those. I took them out particularly just for my own liking, but I could see where it's nice to have that as an option if you're into that, or that the hunt made sense for it. But the full length zipper on the Catalyst foundry pant was probably one of my favorite features. And then just like that extra, I don't know what the technical terminology of the fabric reinforcement, but they're just, so the durability component on all of them was increased substantially.
Yeah, I think you'll see that these pants are going to last a long time. They're going to get you through a different gamut of seasons across the board. And it really is just an elevation of what pants can be, and still utilizing, our household materials that we really kind of built a name off of, but just moving those into hybridization essentially to be able to really kind of like build the best thing we can, right?
Those Obsidian foundries, or the original Obsidian pants were one that it was kind of a love-hate. People seem to either really gravitate to them or just hate them. I was probably in the more not hate, but the dislike area. I didn't usually wear those ever. The that durability or lack thereof was a concern of mine. And then just the way they kind of fit, just my own body configuration, I always leaned into the guide pants more so. But that being said, the new Obsidian foundries, I could definitely see them taking over that early season, kind of placement, if you will, because of the reinforcement and the durability component, and just the fit is a little bit different too. So far, I like it. I haven't used them in the field yet, just because we got them a little later in the season, but I think it's certainly something to be excited about. Yeah, and especially for like backcountry endeavors, right, where you're going to bring one pair of pants. The merino aspect is like hands down, like it's gonna allow you to not stink very much, and that's an important feature, So that's what we got coming on the western side this year. Really stoked about it. It's just like, it's good to see that, we've added a bunch of people into the product side. We've been able to sort of spread out that bandwidth and really focus in on solving problems that, we were bringing back to the table from the field every day, in a much more like sort of aggressive way, and we've tested these things for a long time, made a lot of improvements through that cycle, and excited to see them hit the interwebs, so to speak, pretty soon here. Yeah, so we, if you didn't catch it on the first part of the podcast, we are giving away 3 pairs of the new pants. Super easy to enter. All you got to do is text one word, Hush Foundry, to the number 29071. If you're already a part of our VIP text list, you're going to be automatically entered, and we'll get those winners announced shortly after this little promotion giveaway ends. So it's going to run the 16th of March through the 19th. And we'll announce a winner on or before the 21st. Kev, what about the whitetail side of the world? For those whitetail folks, I think there's some new cool stuff that we've heard some rumblings about.
Yeah, so we've got this new pattern called Spectre that we were fortunate enough to test all last year and the fall before. Um, it's a big endeavor for us. It's a new pattern, something that works incredibly well in the tree. It's built off of this macro cracklature. So essentially, you're running like basically if you're 30 yards from a deer versus 500, it's going to be effective in each of those situations. And that's really something that's Greg Farrell, our whitetail product line manager, has been working on for a long time. So the new pattern that'll drop on a bunch of new styles. Those styles will actually be released probably midsummer. So folks can check that out, firstlite.com, but a whole handful of new things, as well as the original whitetail pieces that we still sell will all be in Spectre as well. So good chance to check that out here coming up pretty shortly.
Yeah, we got to wear that stuff in Kansas, the new Spectre color, and I was very impressed with it. It looked good. I felt like it was a real good. I mean, maybe it's not. I shouldn't say it's a cross between Fusion and Cypher, but it's close to that, I would feel like.
Yeah, it's certainly familiar, right? We're utilizing a lot of shapes and certain colors because Fusion was bound off of these colors in nature. Yeah. What Greg tried to do is really look at shapes and colors for Spectre, because there is such a wide range of, you can be in the same tree 3 months apart and it's going to be a very different environment. So yeah, I'm really impressed with how it turned out. And I mean, the proof's in the pudding. We had a lot of deer stare through us this year from short range and long range. So pretty stoked to see that come to market.
So the Foundry pants are live as of today, the 16th of March. You can go to firstlite.com, check out those that we've been talking about, and then expect to see more later this summer with the introduction of the Spectre pattern and the whitetail goodies. Kev, what hunts? What do you got coming up on the books, man? I know pre-podcast you were talking about trying to shoot as many turkeys as humanly possible this spring.
Yeah, I love eating turkeys, man, and I think that's kind of like, for me at least, it's a nice sort of start. It's good to call birds again and get into that. So we're going to kill a bunch of turkeys. We'll be in Nebraska, Wyoming, South Dakota, and I'll spend quite a bit of time in Eastern Oregon because I love hunting turkeys over there. And then, coming through the summer, I've got an access deer hunt with my good buddy Colton Moore in June. I've been down there a couple years in a row now, and it's just one of those things. If you want to like figure out how to spot and stalk critters, which is kind of a newer thing in Texas, it's not really that traditional, with a bow, great resource to go down to Texas and shoot access deer and kind of get geared up for the season ahead. So I'll be down there in June. We've got a couple fishing trips this summer. We're actually floating the Middle Fork of the Salmon River. A friend of ours drew a permit.
Sweet.
So I am stoked. Never been on that section of the water. From the water, I've seen it from the air and from the ground, but never on the boat. So gonna do that, and then we'll roll into fall. I think myself and Brad Brooks are gonna go to Alaska and try to kill a moose, and that'll be pretty sweet. I've never hunted Alaska. I've only fished it. And then we'll roll into all Idaho has to offer with elk and mule deer and everything in between. And then we kind of wrap up that I shouldn't say wrap up, but we get kind of close towards that November timeframe. We always go to Kansas, and then I'll always join my family at our deer camp in Minnesota. That's kind of the end of the season for me a little bit. I just love to end it there with my folks and my family. And my granddad's 88, and last year he couldn't come because of COVID, but that was the first deer camp he missed since like 1972 or something.
Wow.
Incredible. So that's a special time.
That's cool, man.
Yeah. Safe to say being the director of community at First Light isn't terrible.
Doesn't suck.
No, it, I guess, it's certainly a struggle sometimes with relationships and trying to shoot emails off and bounce back and forth from the field to the office, but it's a great gig, man. They treat us well, and I get to spend a lot of time with guys in the field, which is awesome. That's why I love it.
That's money, man. Well, guys, I think that's a wrap on the conversation with Kev. We appreciate your time today. It was cool learning your history. I just got to know one last question though. Are you running and gunning for turkeys, or are you trying to call them in over decoys? What is a guy like Kevin Harlander do?
Man, I love calling them into decoys, man. I think you get to see the whole scene. You get to really like figure out what works, what doesn't. But I'll probably mix it up a little bit. Usually start off, calling over decoys and trying to get that really your sort of your sounds, everything dialed in, and then I get a little bit more rogue, especially as once you get that first bird down, you can kind of be a little more rogue in your efforts. But yeah, we will have a good spring ahead for sure. And the running and gunning thing, man, I just have not been that successful at it. And it's kind of like elk too. I really like calling those elk into where you're in control a little bit, you know?
Well, I'm going to wrap this up by saying I've just enjoyed seeing where this company's come from the early days of just base layers. And for whatever reason, Eastman's, you guys advertised really heavily in Eastman's. I remember seeing the base layers for the first time. I even think when I signed up for a year subscription, I got a First Light base layer, and I absolutely love the thing. But it's cool to see how it went from base layers to all outerwear, all accessories in between, and how well this product is put together. But what I've enjoyed the most about First Light, and this is honest, in all honesty, is the people and the culture behind it. I've enjoyed my time with you guys and hanging out, and I just love the culture you guys have. And so for you guys at home, I've said this 1,000 times. I'll say it again. I think Kevin will agree. You don't have to have the best gear to get out and hunt. Go and hunt. But if you are in looking for actually good equipment, look at firstlight.com. If you're in the market for it, look it up. You will enjoy it. You'll hunt more comfortable. You'll be able to stay out in the woods longer. And I promote it 100%.
I was gonna say we got a goal to get Kenton on here one of these days and learn the true kind of story. I think it's one of the coolest kind of entrepreneurial stories I know of personally. And Ken is one of the greatest humans I've ever met. So hopefully at some point in time we can get that on here.
They're talking about like they like mortgaged houses and did the deal. Yeah. So it's a real deal. The other thing too, like if you need to pick up anything from firstlight.com, the coolest part is you don't need a lot either. That's the cool thing about merino. So you can pick up a Wick t-shirt and a pair of corrugate guide pants, and you're in it for a couple $100 and you're in the woods. So it doesn't take a lot to get going, and we appreciate everything you guys do too. We got to hit the woods together this year, and it's been a pleasure talking with you all.
Yeah, appreciate your time,
thanks,
Kevin.
buddy.
You bet.
Thanks, guys, for watching. We will catch you guys on the next Hushlife podcast.
Hushlife.